When you say shutting down nuclear missile sites,
one of the professors said, I have friends who work up at Malmstrom Air Force Base, and they have problems there with UFOs flying over the nuclear missile sites and shutting down our nuclear missiles. He said, yeah, there are often UFO sightings when that happens. So I started paying attention.
Dr. Kevin Knuth is a professor of physics and a former NASA scientist, willing to go where most of his colleagues won't: UFOs, UAPs, and the possibility that aliens might already be in our solar system.
I look through cases where you have something unexpected. When people are abducted by gray aliens, there were 60% reported they were given babies to hold. Why would anyone report that?
Specific things that keep popping up all over the world.
Nepal to Congo to Chicago. But here's the interesting surprise. They could have discovered Earth a long time ago. Congress noted that UFOs had become more aggressive toward our pilots in war zones. And if you think of them as having found Earth, they may have the mindset Earth is their planet. We could end up in a conflict eventually. I don't think anybody's ready for this.
Hi, I'm Mayim Bialik.
I'm Jonathan Cohen.
And welcome to our breakdown. As you can tell from my t-shirt, and if you can see close enough, my earrings, today is a day when we're going to discuss the impossibility of aliens. Our guest today is someone who has the incredible opportunity to study unidentified aerial phenomena, UAPs, from the perspective of physics. He is a professor at University at Albany, that's SUNY Albany, New York. Kevin Knuth is a professor of physics. They focus on the scientific study of UAPs. He's a former NASA research scientist. He worked at the Ames Research Center in the Intelligence Systems Division. This episode is a perfect example of how we can blend skepticism, curiosity, criticism with open-mindedness, and the ability to open our conscious experience of what is here and now into a possible understanding of what is beyond what we can see and measure. We're going to be discussing some of the most compelling data out there in terms of speed, acceleration, the amount of power required to even be able to imagine how UAPs would travel. Dr. Knuth is also going to walk us through the statistically significant and disturbing reports of UFO sightings surrounding military and nuclear activity. What is going on? What should we be concerned about? And where do we go to get the information about what happens next? We're going to talk about who we can trust with this information.
We're going to touch on the unique characteristics of 3i Atlas, research that's being done to test actual debris from crash sites and what we can learn from that.
We're also going to talk about the Waterworld hypothesis. What would it mean to imagine that aliens might not be traveling from other places, but might actually be here already, and they might be underwater? You're going to want to make sure you listen to the very, very end of this episode, where we ask Dr. Knuth what has personally happened to him that makes him believe that the study of UAPs is scientifically not only necessary, but critical to our understanding of our humanity. Before we welcome Dr. Knuth, you can find out more about his research at albany.edu/giving/UAPX if you want to learn more about what it means to support this kind of research. Dr. Kevin Knuth, welcome to The Breakdown. Break it down.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
I'd like you to give us a framework of why you do what you do in terms of your study of UAPs.
I was born in 1965, so I was 4 years old with the Apollo moon landings, and I remember them. I remember my dad holding me just after we watched it on TV and pointing up at the moon and saying, there are people up there. And that had such a huge impact on me. And so I was thrilled to see Artemis 2 go around the moon. 1977, I was 12 years old, and that's when Star Wars came out, which of course had a huge impact. And at the same time, at night, 6:30 at night, they would play In Search of with Leonard Nimoy, and In Search of always had some UFO things, which were always exciting and interesting. Went to graduate school at Montana State University and got my master's degree in physics there. And when I first moved out there, that would have been late summer of 1988, I'd been living out there for about a week or so, and classes had just started, and there was a cattle mutilation in Bozeman on a ranch. That night, there were 100 phone calls to the sheriff's office about UFOs, and then you have this cattle mutilation where there were 2 cows that were killed and surgically manipulated. It was very bizarre, and this was all over the news, and people were worried that it's aliens or it's Satanists, and those were the 2 main explanations. Those are the 2 hypotheses everybody ran to, right? And we were discussing this in the physics department, and some of the new students were. We've all, you've been to grad school, so you move to a new place, you're going to be there for 5 years. So the conversation was kind of more centered around what kind of crazy place have we all just moved to, and how are we going to navigate this, right? And it was a pretty heated discussion. And one of the professors came out of his office to see what the commotion was. And clearly, we had bothered him, and we told him, and he didn't have any words of comfort for us. In fact, it was even stranger. He said, yeah, that happens from time to time, and there are often UFO sightings when that happens. But people look into it, and they never figure it out, and then people forget about it until it happens again. Like, well, that's not very satisfactory. And then he tops it all off with this additional statement. He goes, I have friends who are in the Air Force, who work up at Malmstrom Air Force Base in northern Montana, and they have problems there with UFOs flying over the nuclear missile sites and shutting down our nuclear missiles. And, we listened politely, and when he walked away, to be honest, we laughed our butts off, because it was hard to imagine that that's even possible, right? The UFOs are shutting down our nuclear missiles, and our government isn't on high alert. I mean, this isn't all over the place. So nobody really believed that. And that kind of became a running joke for the year. Anytime somebody would say something strange happened, somebody else would chime in, yeah, but it's really strange. UFOs are shutting down nuclear missiles at Malmstrom Air Force Base, and we would all laugh. And so that stuck with me until I was here at Albany teaching, and this would have been about 2015 or so. So it's before the New York Times article, still by Leslie Kane and Ralph Blumenthal and Eileen Cooper. And so it was before that, and I was teaching a course in astronomy and preparing for a lecture on astrobiology and possibility of life elsewhere. And some of my students wanted me to talk about UFOs, and I didn't know what to talk about except the Drake equation or the Fermi paradox. So I was just poking around on the internet to think about, is there anything intelligent I can actually say? And I stumbled on the press conference held by Robert Hastings in 2010, where he had 5 or 6 people from the Air Force talking about UFO incursions at nuclear missile sites. And the first person that he talked to was Robert Salas, who was at Malmstrom Air Force Base. And I got that. I was like, whoa, wait a minute. I heard about this 30 years ago, right? I heard about this when I was in grad school from a physics professor. And it just hit me like, a ton of bricks. Like, wait a minute, this is very possibly real. And nobody's doing anything about it. Nobody even knows about it. And this could be incredibly dangerous. And I was very concerned on hearing this. And then I stayed up. I watched the whole press conference, which was like 2 or 3 hours. I don't think I went to bed till like 3 a.m. that night. I had to get up early for class. It struck me as that somebody needs to look into this and see if this is really real. And so I started just paying attention. I was paying attention. I started reading up on the topic and getting anything that I could that seemed reasonable. And then when the New York Times article came out talking about the ATIP program, then I thought, yeah, scientists need to be involved. Somebody needs to be studying these things. And so I decided to try to study it. Well, I don't know what I can do, but I thought, let's First, I'll do my homework. Let's just do what you should do. So we have a set. I found there were a set of encounters where they had descriptions of how fast these objects were moving. And I thought, well, I can at the very least, I can estimate speeds and accelerations and get some idea of what we're dealing with here. And that really shocked me that the speeds and accelerations were crazy. I mean, crazy huge. The observers would have to be very, very, very wrong for those numbers to be anywhere close to that. So I found that really amazing.
Mayim Bialik's breakdown is supported by Optimizers.
Anyone been struggling with mood swings, like getting really irritated by the simplest things? Do you feel like your hormones might be out of whack? Like maybe you haven't been sleeping well, you're stressing a lot, you're craving foods that you're not used to craving as much. Maybe your skin, your hair, your muscles feel different. Let's talk about a game-changing mineral that can help you feel your best. Magnesium. Meet magnesium. Magnesium is an absolute must for keeping your hormones balanced and your body functioning optimally. Most of us aren't getting nearly enough from our diets alone, and when you're deficient in this vital mineral, it can throw your entire system out of sync. In addition to hundreds of other chemical reactions, magnesium also plays a vital role in hormonal balance, glucose metabolism, and managing symptoms across different stages of life. This makes magnesium supplementation a great support option for all ages, and that's why we're excited to talk about the magnesium breakthrough from Optimizers. This unique formula contains 7 different forms of highly bioavailable magnesium, including magnesium orotate, which is amazing for metabolic and hormonal health. It can also support hormonal health by supporting sleep, digestive health, and help with stress management. Nourish your brain and body with Magnesium Breakthrough now. For an exclusive offer, go to buyoptimizers.com/breaker. Use promo code BREAKER during checkout to save 15%. And if you subscribe, not only will you get amazing discounts and free gifts, you'll make sure your monthly supply is guaranteed. Check it out at buyoptimizers.com/breaker and use the promo code BREAKER.
Mayim Bialik's breakdown is supported by No CD.
Have you ever found yourself stuck replaying the same conversation over and over, often trying to make sure that you didn't say something that makes someone secretly hate you? Maybe you've spent hours researching a minor ache or a pain, even after the doctor said you're fine, because you have these doubts and these fears that just will not go away. Well, you might be surprised to learn that experiences like that, distressing, unwanted thoughts getting stuck in your mind and feeling like you've got to do something to solve it, stop it, or feel 100% sure about it, these can be signs of obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD. And it's true that OCD is actually nothing like the stereotypes like, oh, I really like things organized. Real OCD is a serious condition that can really focus on anything: identity, morals, relationships, even your sense of reality. What makes it so debilitating is that it often chooses to fixate on exactly the things that you care about the most. I've struggled with OCD myself, so I know how misunderstood it is and how hard it can be to figure out what's actually going on, let alone get the right kind of help. That's why I'm here to tell you about NoCD, the world's leading provider of specialized OCD treatment. All of their licensed therapists go through extensive specialty training to identify and effectively treat OCD. NoCD therapists know the many different ways that OCD can show up, how it can attack the things that you value most, and how to help you manage it so that you can get your life back. In live face-to-face virtual sessions, they'll help you reclaim your time, your confidence, and your freedom. NoCD is covered by insurance for over 138 million Americans, which is incredible, and includes support between sessions. You never have to face OCD alone. If any of this sounds like you or someone you love, please head over to NoCD.com. Book a free 15-minute call with their team. That's NOCD.com to learn more and get matched with a therapist who can help.
Mayim Bialik's breakdown is supported by IQ Bar, one of our absolute favorite snack, hydration, and coffee sponsors.
IQ Bar protein bars, IQ Mix hydration mixes, and IQ Joe mushroom coffees are delicious, low-sugar brain and body fuel that you need to win your day. Heads up, the Ultimate Sampler Pack is a great way to try all of the IQ Bar products and the flavors. You get 9 IQ bars, 8 IQ Mix sticks, and 4 IQ Joe sticks. All IQ Bar products are clean label certified and entirely free from gluten, dairy, soy, GMOs, and artificial ingredients. There's plenty of flavor combinations to choose from across all IQ Bar products, from mint chocolate chip protein bars to blueberry pomegranate hydration mixes to vanilla spice coffee, and even limited edition and seasonal flavors too. With over 20,000 five-star reviews and counting, more people than ever are fueling their busy lifestyles with IQ Bar's brain and body boosting bars, hydration mixes, and mushroom coffees. And the ultimate sample pack includes all three. This is my IQ Bar box of bars that is empty except for one bar because Jonathan got close to it. We always have these handy when we're recording, and it's our favorite way to refuel between recordings. Right now, IQ Bar is offering our special podcast listeners 20% off all IQ Bar products, including the Ultimate Sampler Pack, plus free shipping. To get your 20% off, text BREAKDOWN to 64,000. Text BREAKDOWN to 64,000. That's breakdown to 64,000. Message and data rates may apply. See terms for details. Generally speaking, why are so many scientists of a variety of fields afraid to touch this stuff?
I mean, there clearly is a taboo against it. You know, a lot of it probably has to do with the way that it's been covered up by our government and other governments. And that is, it doesn't take much to cover it up, which is why it doesn't need to be a grand conspiracy theory. All you have to do is make fun of it. You just make fun of the witnesses and everybody laughs and giggles. They might report it on the nightly news, and the anchor people are laughing while they're talking about it, and they've got the little silly graphic of a saucer with a green person in it, and that's all it takes. And everybody looks like nutcases. So scientists don't want to get involved in it. Some scientists are very adamantly against it. Like when they find out you're working on it, you are no longer a scientist in their minds. It's a very strange response. And it's not a response that you would expect a scientist to have. Scientists ought to be curious, right? And they have this strange expectation that there has to be some kind of smoking gun evidence. I mean, Michio Kaku uses that phrase all the time. There's no smoking gun evidence. Well, there never is in science. I study exoplanets, and we don't have smoking gun evidence about what their atmospheres are like. We don't have samples. Nobody's been there. Nobody's actually seen the planet with their own eyes. But we know a lot about them. You get lots of little pieces of information, and you piece that all together, and under a theory, you can make inferences, and that's basically how you work in science.
Humans like to find patterns, and we are wired to recognize patterns. And sometimes that means we will create patterns where they don't exist. And when we're talking about this kind of data, it's very tempting to piece it together into a pattern that points to there are aliens and they're interested in nuclear facilities. Can you give us a little bit of a background as to when people started talking about potential alien interest in nuclear sites, military sites? How legitimate is that? And is that a place for us to start the investigation?
I think it is legitimate for a few reasons. I think first that this was recognized rather early on. In fact, I have an article from 1951, and it's put out by the Atomic Energy Commission, and they're asking people to report UFO sightings near nuclear power plants. That's very odd. I mean, clearly somebody knew something was going on, right?
But that's also selection bias, right? Because if they were to say, we'd like you to report alien sightings near dairy farms, I can't go back in time, at least not currently, and say, well, if we had been looking at dairy farms, maybe, and again, I'm devil's advocate here, maybe people who think that they're seeing UFOs will see them anywhere you tell them to look.
That's very possible, yeah. But I think, so I mentioned that because that was the earliest piece of information that highlights a possible connection. You then have many of the Air Force sightings are related to nuclear weapons being shut down, which is interesting. If the fact that they're actually somehow possibly interacting with these, whether it's an intentional interaction or a non-intentional interaction, it's not clear.
When you say shutting down nuclear missile sites,
Robert Salas describes this well. A UFO would come down and hover over one of the launch tubes for the nuclear missile, and shortly after it would basically become deactivated. He's in one of his interviews, he said that it was a guidance malfunction that caused the shutdown. So, is it an intentional shutdown? I mean, most people, I think, are assuming it's intentional, but it doesn't need to be. If you have a guidance system running on this nuclear missile, the missile needs to know where it is. It needs to know that it's still in the launch tube, right?
In the absence of other evidence, my first assumption is not alien. My first or second or even 10th assumption might be there's many countries in the world that would love to fuck with our missiles. Right? Like that. So I'm not necessarily going to UFO, but maybe you can give us a little bit more of the landscape, of how we piece together all of these things to direct us towards that, as opposed to many of the other explanations that some of us would come up with.
The main difficulty is this started, as far as I know, the nuclear missiles being shut down started in the 1960s. And so at that time, nobody had drones at that time. You don't have a drone. So these objects were behaving very much like what we would today call drones, right? And so I think that's one of the major difficulties. When they were observed, they looked like what people described UFOs to be. Some of the descriptions, balls of light. And so this is where they went to that explanation. And it was apparently rather common. My wife's from Louisiana, and we were down for Mardi Gras 2 years ago. We were having a little barbecue for family, and we were grilling, and I was at the grill with my wife's uncle Matt, and I noticed he had he had been in the Air Force, and I'd never really thought about that, but he had a cap on, and his cap said Air Force and said Malmstrom Air Force Base. And I was like, wait, you were at Malmstrom? When were you at Malmstrom? And he said the early 1970s, which is right the time period when these shutdowns were happening. I said, did you know anything about UFOs shutting down nuclear missiles? He goes, oh yeah, that happened all the time and blah, blah, like it was common knowledge. And I ran and got my wife. I said, you have to come out here and hear this. And I had him tell her because I'm tired of being the only crazy person in the room. It was nice to have somebody else like, yeah, this happened all the time. Yeah, so that's apparently it was not a rare event. And there's a nice study by the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, and they were studying UFO sightings from 1947 to the mid-70s. They did a comparison of the numbers of sightings, UFO sightings at nuclear sites, either nuclear production sites or storage sites or weapon sites, and then compared that to nearby military bases and nearby cities. And it turned out that the nuclear missile sites had more sightings than the others did. And in fact, those sightings went back earlier. The sightings at nuclear sites started when the sites were being constructed, before there were any nuclear materials there.
If we were to think about, a UFO that exists outside of this planet, right? Like it's not here now. And it's coming down to, let's say, pick up, some radioactivity detection system that's like making it come down, whatever. Explain to us from a physics perspective, what are we actually talking about? How is this UFO actually getting here?
It's related to one of Carl Sagan's arguments against UFOs being alien. And that was he said something like, I have a hard time believing that you've got a craft arriving from interstellar space every Tuesday.
Right.
And I think he's right about that. I think that's not what's happening. I think they live here.
The Sagan perspective would be, in theory, that outside of our galactic kind of knowledge, there are places, right, where there are flying saucers, for lack of a better word, and they somehow can travel across time, right? They're traveling from wherever they are at speeds that we don't even understand, because technically, right, that's where they'd be coming from, is outside of our remote measurement.
From another star system.
Correct,
yeah.
from another star system. Great. So they would be then entering our atmosphere undetected until a moment of reveal, right? Or until they need to access whatever information they're here to gather. And then they are able to, again, against all of our measurement capabilities, disappear out of sight, sometimes in an instant. And then they exist somewhere in another star system with whatever information. I mean, one question I have, consistent with that is why are they crashing? If they're sophisticated enough, right, to be traveling across galaxies and star systems, they can't just keep steering correctly?
Because they're fighting with the people they're traveling with. They're all hangry.
Their wife is saying, why don't you stop and ask for directions? Anyway, so your solution to my question is they live here.
They have to live within one light day of Earth.
What's a light day?
So that basically puts them in our solar system somewhere. So they have to be somewhere in our solar system and very possibly here on Earth already. The Soviets, when trying to study some of these objects, would make military maneuvers, especially naval maneuvers. So they would perform these large naval maneuvers that would typically just confuse the United States. But what the Soviets were doing is they would make this large naval maneuver, and then UFOs would show up, and they would study them. So they were actually moving military equipment around to get UFOs to come. And that would typically happen within 24 hours. So light travels 186,000 miles a second, right?
Got it.
So for a UFO to get here in 24 hours, the light would have had to travel out information some distance, and then they have to travel back.
If we're talking about us communicating with aliens and them receiving information enough for them to act on it and then show up, why on earth do they have to follow our information timescale of how bits and quanta travel through the universe?
This also happens with natural disasters. So with the Fukushima nuclear power plant disaster, there were UFOs there the next day.
What if their method of detection, information transfer, travel, what if none of it obeys any of the laws that we can talk about? And I'm not just bringing this up to give you a straw man. It's very interesting to me how we limit ourselves when we're talking about something like aliens, which is limitless as far as I'm concerned. They may be communicating on a level that we don't even understand. Like the dog whistle, right? Extrapolate that out. They're operating on an AI energy level that no one understands, and it also detects the level of estrogen in my blood. I don't know.
No, that's a good point, and it makes studying something that you don't know anything about very difficult.
Right.
You can either just say, I don't know anything about this, so everything's open, or you can say, well, I do know how this typically works. So if this is typically, if information's basic, if they're getting information the way everybody else here does, then you're limited by the speed of light. And so that means that they have to not be that far away.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and grant you that one possible solution, one possible, explanation for numerous decades of reports of some sort of temporal connection between military or radioactive activity on this planet and some sort of increase in reports of sightings, activity, for those things to occur temporally, the logical explanation that we can provide within the framework of math and physics and science that we have, the logical conclusion would be they don't have to travel that far. Let's say aliens are within a light day of us. What should I practically be thinking about for a framework? Are they hiding in clear sight? What does this look like?
I mean, that's a good question. We don't know anything about them or their intentions or what they're up to, so it's hard to know exactly. They probably have a if they originate from another star system, then you would hypothesize that they have some type of base or colony or something like that here with the scale unknown. It can't be a huge scale because we would have noticed already. So it's and are they hiding? That's very possible. They could have a base on an asteroid in the asteroid belt, and it would take forever to find that. They could be in our oceans, underground, on Earth. You could do the same for some of Jupiter's moons. Europa has a 60-mile deep ocean. They could be living there. They could be from Europa. They might not actually be from another star system. They could also be from Earth. They might have lived here the whole time and we didn't know it. So that's another possibility. There's so many possibilities it's hard to know. There's also Michael Masters in Montana has suggested they're time travelers. So it's very hard to know what the situation is without being able to get hard data.
What hard data is the most compelling to you that supports that something is going on that is extraterrestrial, as it were?
The most interesting for me has been the speeds and accelerations and the amount of power involved in some of these maneuvers, and also their luminosities. That's one thing that Bruce Maccabee had looked at when he was alive, and Jacques Vallée has looked at, and that is that some of these craft are very luminous, like bright, burning people's eyes, people getting sunburnt. But these things are that luminous, and in fact, Jacques Vallée has a paper that came out last year in the same special issue that our paper came out in, where they looked at a landing in northern Louisiana, and I think it was right at the border of Arkansas, where the UFO had landed in a clearing, and a physics professor had actually seen the light from the object and realized that this thing was putting out megawatts of light, and literally stopped in the highway, turned his car around and went the other way because I don't want to go anywhere near this thing. And that it actually scorched the trees. And so they did a study of the bark, the scorched bark, to get some idea about the energies involved. And so some of the UFOs are putting out hundreds of megawatts of light. It's basically a nuclear power plant amount of light being emitted. Why you would need to do that is beyond me. And it's that's shocking, but that's something that humans wouldn't be able to do or wouldn't bother doing. So it's very strange.
This is being written about, when some people who aren't in the space hear about a claim like that there was a craft that landed and was observed, they can say, well, where's the picture? How come we didn't have a cell phone? How come we haven't, back to the smoking gun? But the article Valerie just posted says, estimates of radiative energy values in ground level observation of unidentified aerial phenomenon, new physical data. So people are writing about this.
And in that case, there's hard data. There's actually the tree bark.
You're like, what is happening in that tree bark? What is happening that it's being observed in that way?
Do all indications point to alien? Not necessarily.
Not all of them do. Yeah.
Right. You always have to think of, is there an adversarial nation, experiment, terrorist, whatever, who is experimenting with things that we don't understand, especially if it's from a country with technology that is secretive or that we don't know about. These are all sort of like the possibilities that are there. I think the question is, why is it so elusive, Dr. Knuth? Like, do you think that there's, you know, is there a plan to hide this, and just sometimes they don't hide it well? Like, what is the message that's trying to be communicated with kind of intermittent and disparate visitations like this? Is there a larger message that some of us might say, look, if this is happening, why is it happening sporadically? Why is it happening in this way? Is there interest, and also, like, I'm a Contact fan, I'm an Arrival fan, is this is it a benevolent message? Is there, something we should worry about? Could it be that they don't believe in nuclear war and they'd like to destroy all of the reactors because they know that there's a greater love and peace than we have been able to access on this planet?
First, you're absolutely right. They're not all. We know for a fact they're not all alien spacecraft. I mean, most sightings have prosaic explanations, and that's 97% of the sightings or so have prosaic explanations, and are usually misidentified aircraft, misidentified human aircraft, right? But UAP is still a class of objects, not a specific type of thing. So we don't have a taxonomy of what these things all are yet. So are some of them adversarial drones? Very probably. That's probably the case, and probably a larger percentage of those than there are alien craft. The most compelling pieces of evidence are usually the amounts of energy and power involved. If you think about it, you got something putting out hundreds of megawatts of light. It means you're dealing with that amount of power in your craft. Well, if you have a 1%, all of our human devices have some inefficiency to them. So even if it's 99% efficient, most of our things are running around 20% efficiency, right? We're not thermodynamics is hard. But even if they're really good, they got 99% efficiency, that means there's a 1% inefficiency. And if they're putting out 100 megawatts of light, that means they've got 1 megawatt of power going into waste heat inside the craft, which is incredibly dangerous. You wouldn't be able to do that. That wouldn't work. So it's not clear. It's not clear how to even interpret the results, because we don't know how you could engineer something like that in the first place. Why you would do it or how you would do it, it's really not clear. And I think that's some of the most compelling piece of evidence. But most sightings are not those things, right? And I think that's one thing that's been difficult. I still have, even scientists will ask me, how do UFOs fly? I said, well, they fly different. Some fly differently than others, and we don't know all the different types of craft there are. And takeoffs, I find takeoffs interesting because they almost never go from the ground to zooming away. They don't almost never do that. They get off the ground some distance, hover for a second, and then zoom away. But how they get off the ground is different for different craft. So in the Lonnie Zamora case in New Mexico, Socorro, New Mexico, this was, I don't remember the dates, the 60s, I guess. This craft, blimp-shaped craft, used something like rocket engines to get off the ground. It actually had a rocket blast, and sagebrush was on fire. And then the thing hovered and then was gone. Whereas you have another case in France where the Amaranth case, where this thing was in a field and the thing lifted off, but there were no sound, nothing, no flames, no sound, no histrionics. But the thing, as it lifts off, all the grass pointed toward the thing, like it was statically charged. So these craft are using different propulsion techniques. We don't even know what these, we don't know the taxonomy even yet. We haven't done the work of stamp collecting yet. So it's we're in a hard spot.
How far apart were those examples? Is it that they're using different technology, or the technology that they have has advanced?
Socorro was 1964.
And Amaranth was probably not too different.
The Socorro example, it was a sergeant that reported it, Sergeant Zamora. So this was a sergeant who called in what he thought was some sort of car accident or something. I think this is another question, and that sort of brings up, like, who do we trust? Because when farmers were reporting that rocks were falling from the sky, and they were, oh, those dumb farmers, they don't know what they're talking about. And then, it was actually, things do fall from the sky. How do we decide who to trust? And what have you found in terms of evidence? Do we trust one person's report more than another person's report? Because a lot of these things, you sort of have to first believe the report. We talked with David Kipping about this, right? Like, how do you, as a scientist, decide what gets weight? What evidence kind of tips you from, I don't know, this sounds anecdotal, or maybe it was a hallucination, or maybe they were asleep? What tips the scale for you in terms of understanding who to trust?
That's probably the hardest thing to deal with. I mean, most of the information we have is anecdotal evidence, which is not very trustworthy. I don't think anybody would claim otherwise. What I typically do with it is I look at different anecdotes, and I look for commonalities that are unexpected. And especially in older cases. In older cases, you didn't have the global communication that you do nowadays.
You didn't have the vernacular of, oh, they're going to expect me to say this, or I'm going to lean towards that. So older data is technically more isolated in a good way.
Typically, we'll focus on older cases, and you want to look for something that's unexpected. I mean, that's basically what you do with information theory. Information is related to entropy, but a good way to think about is it's the sum of p log p of your probability times the logarithm of the probability of the event that you're thinking about. And you can think of the logarithm of the probability of an event as being it actually has a name. It's called the surprise, which is a great name for a physical for a quantity. So the logarithm of a probability of a signal is called the surprise. It's minus the logarithm of the probability. So if the probability is small, then the surprise is large. So I basically look through cases where you have something unexpected, where the surprise is high, right? And if you can find that there's some consistency across cases, especially across the world or over some periods of time, then I think that's more reliable.
What's one of your favorite surprises?
So I have two favorite surprises. The first one has to do with cars shutting down. When a UFO hovers over a car, the car sometimes shuts down. Not all the time. Sometimes the car shuts down. And then sometimes when the UFO leaves, the car will start up again by itself.
What?
Basically, the kinds of cars that get shut down were cars with spark plugs. So they're gasoline-powered cars, not diesel.
Right.
The hypothesis is then that the UFO is putting out high electric fields, and that's ionizing the air, which is shorting out the spark plugs.
Okay.
And so you short out the spark plugs, so you kill a gasoline engine, but a diesel engine doesn't have spark plugs, so it isn't affected. So then why does the car start again sometimes when it leaves? And that was the most unexpected thing for me. I thought, that's just very weird. And McCampbell wrote a paper in 1983 on cars restarting. And what happens is when you've got a high electric field, you're also shorting out the distributor cap. So you're shorting out that too. So you've got current flowing to the primary ignition coil. So you've got a magnetic field around the primary ignition coil. Now, when the UFO leaves, the cap stops shorting, the current stops, right. The field collapses, but that induces a field into the secondary coil, which then sends a spark to one of the pistons. And if that piston is ready to fire, if it has an air gas mixture in it ready to fire, it'll fire and that'll start the car. And it turns out you can calculate how often that should happen. And it's rough. I don't remember the exact number. I'd have to pull it up, and I don't want to have to mess with it here. But I've worked that out. It's basically, it should happen like 10% of the time.
Wow.
So what happens with observation? So here's the interesting surprise, from Mark Roediger's database of cars being shut down, I think there was something like 2,000 cases. 200 of those people reported the cars restarting 10% of the time. So what about these cases? Well, those people were telling the truth. They all 2,000 of them would have been telling the truth for the statistics to work, right? So they were dependable, at least in that
Right.
aspect of the description of what happened. So the other one is one that got me more interested in the whole abduction phenomenon, which when I first got into this, I was like, I don't even want to think about that. That seems crazy to me. And that was, I was watching a talk by John Mack, where he was the Harvard psychologist who had studied alien abductions, and got into it trying to understand what psychological thing is happening to these people so that they think they're all being abducted by aliens, right? And his conclusion was like, that's because they're being abducted by aliens, apparently. And so was his conclusion. So I was watching a video of a talk of his, and he talked about how when people are abducted by gray aliens, there were 60% of the people reported around the world that they were given babies to hold before so they would have some medical tests done, something's medically done to them. And then before they were sent back home, they were given babies to hold. And I was like, wait, why would anyone report that? That's bizarre. And so that was one of the surprising things. But it turns out it's 60% of the cases. From Nepal to Congo to Chicago. It's again something, and these are old cases, so these are things that you wouldn't expect.
When we're thinking impossibly, what it means is that, as kind of Jeff describes it, it doesn't mean that you take everything off the table that you can't explain and say, well, I can explain everything and everything else doesn't make sense. What leaving everything on the table means that even the things that seem impossible, they exist. And even if you're looking at anecdotal reports, why would people from vastly disparate cultures and cultural narratives and social dynamics? I mean, look, and this is one of the things we can talk about, like, what does the human mind conjure, right? What do I have in common with someone in Nepal and in Morocco and in Colombia, right? We all have a human brain, and it can construct all sorts of things. But we also know that culture is incredibly influential on determining narratives and folklore, and right? Why would you have those kinds of similarities across the world? I mean, there has to be some explanation. I don't know if it's aliens, but it's certainly not nothing.
Yeah, you can't be sure that they are being given babies to hold by aliens. But you can be sure something's going. So there's something interesting there, right? There's something that's causing those correlations. So
I'm kind of like hearing the skeptic being like, well, I'm sure lots of things happened, right? But we're not talking about finding similarities between, these people walked on 2 feet and therefore aliens exist, right? We're not talking about reports of something that's mundane or banal. We're talking about specific things that seem to keep popping up all over the world in ways that we cannot explain. And it's not enough, especially from a scientific perspective, to say it must be bull. Like, that's not an explanation.
It's something that calls for study and calls for an explanation. And I think that's really all you can say about it.
You have a colleague who studies very specific material. What is he focused on, and what can we learn from that?
Matthew is a colleague of mine at Albany, absolutely brilliant, great guy. He has developed a new technique to to basically detect the isotopes in a material. And it's non-destructive. So he basically irradiates it with neutrons. So basically, when you radiate the material with neutrons, you're basically throwing neutrons into the nuclei. You're making those nuclei radioactive. And then they decay. So you watch them decay, and you watch the decay rates, and then you figure out what element that was, and you then know what it decayed into, so you know what it had been before you made it radioactive. And that's basically what he's doing. So it's a brilliant technique and works. And so he's been looking at material from purported crash sites and UFO crashes, and this again, extremely difficult work because of the community we're dealing with. It has all sorts of beliefs about what this is already before you look at it. And I'll just quote Matthew here. One day I asked him how it was going and what he's found, and he goes, "I have analyzed more earth dirt than I would have ever imagined." Basically. And that's one of the problems we're finding here. The UFO community is thrilled that we scientists are involved, but in a lot of ways, we ruin everything. We ruin all the fun. And because we find out that most of these things are not that interesting. And so most of these material he's analyzed is not interesting and clearly not alien. And I think it's causing some conflict. We have the community now is like, well, wait a minute, you guys are saying this isn't what we thought it was, and so this isn't evidence, but they want evidence so badly that this is becoming a bit of a problem.
But I think this is sort of a reckoning moment, for this community, because, what we have to believe is that if there is a truth, we should be able to communicate that truth among believers and non-believers. It's the point of truth. It doesn't take sides and it's not partisan.
The truth is the important part, right? We want to get to the truth. And that means that we've got to get rid of all the stuff that isn't true. And some of that's hard for some people to let go of, but you're going to have to let go of it if you want to get to the truth. Yeah.
One of the most interesting things that many of us, have heard in support of there are UFOs coming from other places is it's made of a material that couldn't have been made right on this planet. It's got properties that we've never seen. It's put together in a way, right? So even if some of those things, let's say, are harder to decipher, what's the story with angel hair? I thought I had heard everything.
Angel hair is weird, and it turned out to get weirder the more I looked into it as well. There have been instances where you've had UFOs hovering and they're basically emitting or expelling some kind of fibrous material that then floats down to Earth and has been collected by people, sometimes collected and saved. And in fact, there's one of the biggest sightings happened during a soccer match in Florence. A couple UFOs flew over the field and then hovered over the field during the soccer match. There were 10,000 witnesses. It was such a dramatic event. The game stopped. The players were watching the UFOs. That's how dramatic it was. And then angel hair was coming down from the UFOs. And so this is in a newspaper article. And I think in our paper, we have a picture from that newspaper article showing a girl holding up some angel hair. And a chemist at the time in Italy analyzed that angel hair and found that it contained like boroscate silica or something, like glass. Basically, it was some kind of glass. And but the problem is that stuff was not very carefully collected. It was collected by people at a soccer match and then carried around with them until they could get it home. So it could have dirt on it. And so that could be what they were analyzing. So a chemist, Phyllis Budinger, has studied, chemical evidence at UFO landing sites and things like this. And angel hair is one of the things that she's studied. And that's weirder because she's found that angel hair is basically caterpillar silk.
Oh.
Again, my hands are up. I don't know. I really wish I had more meaningful answers.
Right. I'm trying to think of a number of solutions that might not be UFO. none of them make a lot of sense. Like, why would an adversarial government need to drop caterpillar silk over a football match in 1954 in Florence? But if I let my brain kind of dream and imagine, right, there's some sort of, organic material that is somehow related to unidentified aerial phenomenon. Like, I can say that.
It's very not clear why this is happening or how it's happening and how the angel hair is emitted by these objects. In our paper, we have a painting made by a person who witnessed this. There was these foot-long cylinders flew over their house, and they had a pond in their property, and these cylinders were hovering over the pond, and other cylinders came in from other places, and they were spinning and spewing out this angel hair, which they collected and was found to be the same stuff as caterpillar silk. It's related to it.
It's unbelievable.
I don't think anybody knows what to make of it, right? So,
just circling back to your colleague who, you said was a bit of a downer. Is he finding anything that really is unusual that he can't explain?
He has found that he had some material from a purported crash site, and that material he can't make radioactive. It basically shields and absorbs all the radiation he can throw at it. And he put it in a box with a plutonium source for a week and took it out, and it was not affected by it. So it's really strange. And that's interesting because if I wanted to make radiation shielding, that's exactly what I would do. That's what you would hope for. So a spaceship with radiation shielding, this would be amazing radiation shielding, whatever this material is. So he's still studying it, actually.
And we don't have that capability currently.
No.
It would be very helpful if we did have it, because we could create casing that would then prevent our own nuclear material from causing harm.
Yeah, it would be great to have some radiation shielding like that material. That's interesting stuff.
Is it possible to break it down and reverse engineer it, or we don't have that capability?
You can do it, and he's working on getting more information about it. So he's studying it now. So I think he's hoping to be able to break it down at some point and figure out what it's doing. He has some hypotheses as to what's going on.
I mean, out of all the things that we're talking about, like, that seems, for me, the most interesting. Like, angel hair, I'm like...
That's weird. It's just weird, right?
It's just weird, but not all that practical. But this, where it speaks to how a craft might move, it speaks to advancements that we need. Because the idea would be if they're moving around undetected, then they have more sophisticated technology than we do. And we would benefit from that. So... what do you think about that, Em?
I'm going to throw up my hands like Dr. Knuth. I don't know. The first thing I thought when I heard about this angel hair was I thought of the biblical report of manna from heaven, which they think may have been some sort of, kind of high carbohydrate, I believe, kind of stuff that comes off this plant that in theory could sustain you if you didn't have a lot of other nutrients. And so the first thing I thought was, is this some sort of byproduct? Is this some sort of, I don't know. The idea is not necessarily, if you want to think impossibly, if you want to like blow the lid off the box, the idea is not what is the purpose of them dropping caterpillar silk. It's what might be going on inside of a vessel, the byproduct of which might be this. It's not like I believe that the way that aliens are communicating with us is by throwing caterpillar silk on us and hoping we figure it out.
Right.
So it's a byproduct. It's something going on in the craft that could be the exhaust of...
I'm just saying that we want, yes, if there's hoofbeats, it's usually horses. So if you see an unidentified flying object and it's throwing, caterpillar silk down, yeah, the most logical explanation is they want us to receive it and like build a castle with it. I don't know. But what often, can happen, obviously not as commonly, but it still could happen, is that we're trying to interpret the wrong thing, right? I mean, I'm sure, Dr. Knuth, you probably have this all the time. You're focusing on one thing, but that actually might not be what's going on, much like the Epstein files and many wars around the world, right? Like, where are we being distracted? And if we're talking about beings that either live here or come from other, galaxies or star systems, if they have that level of sophistication, of travel ability, detection ability, they're probably not going to be as simple-minded as we are. That's my guess.
I think there's a divide between there's some evidence that we can't quite figure out. There's the scientific work of proving and trying to create an explanation, which is, deconstructing material and trying to understand the physical properties of the material, trying to understand propulsion that then feeds into the evidence. And then there's theory based on, being immersed in enough of this information to ask, like, what does it mean? What is the purpose? And that is, of course, the hardest part, because we don't have enough of the other two to satisfy.
What are they doing? What is their intent and what are they doing? And I think that's probably also the hardest, because if they aren't human, then they could be thinking very differently than we are, right? And very different motivations.
It does make us think a little bit about the spiritual texts that we've seen as clues in a way. Like, why would it be about nuclear? Why would it be that they're showing up in these particular areas? Why would it be that if the Russians are moving around material and having war games, that is the signal that they're being drawn to? What is it about Earth that they find so interesting? Do they have a vested interest in the evolution of Earth, the materials, the survival or not of the planet in some way? Are they benevolent, or are they, harvesting? Like, these are all big ideas. I don't know if, we want to spend a little bit of time just exploring sort of how you think, not necessarily with a concrete proof of any of it.
The most common thing people will say was clearly they, we have they've been here a long time. These sightings like this go back centuries. And so if they've been here a long time, then the argument usually is, well, if they wanted to conquer us and colonize Earth, they would have done it already. Well, maybe not. You don't actually know. The picture I've kind of put together that seems to describe a lot of what's going on is that they could have discovered Earth a long time ago and have bases here where they're basically studying the biology. I mean, we would do the same thing. We would study biology. It wasn't until the middle of the last century, till World War II, really, that humans became powerful enough that we could really wreck the planet. With the nuclear weapons, we could destroy the planet. With our pollution, we are destroying the planet. So this we became a problem. And if you think of them as having found Earth, Earth, they may have the mindset Earth is their planet, right? And we happen to live here. And but now humans are a danger to their planet. And so we could end up in a conflict eventually, if that's the case. So it may not be that they wanted to colonize Earth. They've done it the way they wanted to already. They did so a long time ago. But we could be a problem at this point, and they could be watching us very closely to make sure that, see what we're doing and to try to dissuade us in some ways or whatever. Congress had noted that with the statement that UFOs had become more aggressive toward our pilots in war zones in the last few years. They've been flying at our planes and things like that. So Lou Elizondo had mentioned that to me as well. That 2015 they had near daily sightings in the Persian Gulf, where they were flying sorties into Syria, and in that case they actually had to fly. They would be flying to Syria from the aircraft carrier, and they would have UFOs flying at the planes and then dodging them at last minute. They were taking that to be aggressive maneuvers, which is very possibly what's going on. So that's kind of the picture that I've kind of put together. They've been here a long time. They study Earth, and now we're a bit of a problem. We know we're a problem. We recognize that already to some degree. So
When was that increase in how they were interacting with pilots?
those instances were in 2015.
It's fascinating to think about this being their planet. Where are they? Right? We talked about, potentially that they are here. They're trying to evade larger detection. Where would they actually be?
Well, the oceans are very poorly explored. They're great places to hide, great places to live, actually. So I would guess probably in the ocean somewhere. And 2/3 of the UFO sightings are, related to water. So, and especially with UFOs going into water, coming out of water. They could very well live in the water. I mean, living in an ocean is a great place to live.
Mammals do it all the time, but we're talking about aliens.
Right. Yeah. So we live on a surface where you have to deal with an atmosphere. And atmospheres of planets can vary dramatically. So you go to Venus, which is just on the edge of the habitable zone, and the atmosphere is 800 degrees Fahrenheit on a normal day, right? And then you go to Mars, which is further out on the other edge of the habitable zone, and you're looking at something like 100 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. So you've got literally 1,000-degree difference in atmospheric temperatures that you would have to deal with going from planet to planet. Now, if you go to an ocean, a liquid water ocean, water is very common, and oceans seem to be common. So, so you go to a liquid water planet. Well, liquid water is only liquid from 32 degrees Fahrenheit to 212 degrees Fahrenheit. So you've got a more limited range of temperatures, and you would have to worry about water pressure, but you can actually descend to a depth where you've got pressures that you can deal with, and you're shielded from radiation, you're shielded from solar flares, cosmic rays, you're shielded from meteorite impacts to some degree.
Are they living in vessels underneath there? Are they able to breathe?
I think we have a hard time, picturing things that are not carbon based, right? Meaning, I don't know. Like, I can make up any number of things. Like, there's some detection where they can be collapsed into, water molecules. Like, I don't know. I don't know what that means.
It's been observed that craft go into the water and come out of the water. And those are some of the oldest sightings because they're kept in ship's records. Richard Dolan, in his more recent book, has lists of sightings like this that go back easily go back 200 years. So whether they live in their ships underwater, which you could easily do, or are there cities down there, are they from there? I mean, did they evolve underwater and they're just another intelligent species on this planet that we even that's been staying away from us? That's possible too.
Can you talk a little bit about what role you think the government plays in the information that we're allowed to have, the information that we should have, and talk a little bit about this age of disclosure and some of the acknowledgement that there is research and in many cases compelling evidence that has been kept from the public?
Our governments have been interested in these things since the 1940s. The Scandinavian sightings go back, the ones that captured their attention go back to the 1930s, actually. But the Roswell crash happened in 1947, along with another crash that happened 2 weeks later, only about 100 miles away. So you have, and you actually have a spike of sightings there that goes up from an average of 7 sightings in the U.S. per day. And during that week, jumps up to about 250 sightings per day across the country. Now, is this because of Kenneth Arnold having seen these and being in the paper? Very possibly. But some of these sightings are very compelling with landings and hundreds of people witnessing them. And so it's interesting. Something interesting was going on. And whether that just captured our attention or was actually an increase of activity, I don't think you would you'd have to have more information to be able to study that. But that seems to be when our government became interested in this. So there has to be some people who have known that these things were non-human craft for a long time. Herman Oberth, who's a rocketry pioneer, he was the mentor to Wernher von Braun. He gave a talk in, I think, 1954 on UFOs. And in his talk, he mentions that he had seen over 50 instances of radar data showing that these things are traveling at speeds of, he gave a speed of 19 kilometers a second, which is about close to 40,000 miles an hour, which is close to the speeds I estimated in the paper I wrote for the Tic Tac UAP in the Nimitz case. So 40,000, to be in orbit, you have to be, I mean, the space station is going about 17,000 miles an hour. And I think on the way to the moon, I think the top speed that our Artemis was going was something like 25,000 miles an hour, on that order. So UFOs go faster than Artemis went, right? And in fact, UFOs are basically have been measured to go the speeds of the New Horizon probe that we sent to Pluto. That's going about 40,000 miles an hour. And that's been known since the 1950s. So Herman Oberth, who's mentor to Wernher von Braun and working on our rocket program, knew this in the 1950s. And he couldn't have been the only person who had access to that data. So somebody's known this for a long time. And they covered it up for whatever reason. Do we want, and there's probably many reasons at this point for covering it up. Worrying about shocking the public, because the public in 1947 wouldn't have been ready for an idea like that. And you're just out of World War II, and now we have another bigger problem, right? There are aliens who are more advanced than any of us. The Americans, nobody would have been ready for that.
Yeah, I think the question is, are Americans ready now?
I don't think anybody's ready for this, really. I think it's going to shock things in a lot of different ways that are rather unpredictable. It's going to be a lot like COVID. It's going to hit several institutions in unpredictable ways, and it just will end up breaking lots of things. And I think it'll be rather disruptive.
Well, there's no unifying force. There's no way that we understand how to interact. We don't know the motives. The virus, at least you understand its motive, is to replicate and expand.
Yeah, this is a problem. I mean, and the question is, what are they going to discuss? We don't know what's all known. And my guess at this point, in talking to people on the inside, who are able to share certain things, I don't think we know that much. And I don't think they're going to be able to answer many of the same questions you've asked me. I don't think that's actually known. I asked Lou Elizondo at one point. We had a meeting of scientists with some government people, and one of the questions was, how many non-human craft are operating on Earth at any given time? Just rough number, right? Is it 10? Is it 100, 1,000, 10,000? Couldn't answer that. I don't think they know. So they don't know the simplest answers, the things that you would want to know. And I think that's going to be a problem with disclosure, is that it's going to raise so many questions that nobody has the answer to, which is why scientists should have been involved in this in the first place.
There's been a lot of conversation about Three Eye Atlas. We got to speak with Avi Loeb. What is your perspective on the peculiarity of that particular object?
We ought to be studying these things like crazy. This is an interstellar object. Let's get all the data we can on it. Astronomers to just say, well, it's a comet. Well, you don't know it's a comet. We don't, and what's this comet like? And clearly it's different. There's a lot of differences, and it's a strange thing. He's absolutely right about that. There's several anomalies, and we should be following these as close as we can. They should be studied carefully.
One of the key anomalies is that it only has 4% water vapor on its return from around the sun, which is far too little.
Exactly. It's not a comet. Clearly not a comet. Comets are big, dirty snowballs. There ought to be nickel and iron. There was a process at some point that was able to separate nickel from iron, which is hard to do. So why is that the case? Yeah, these are all questions that need to be answered. I totally agree with him.
Yeah, it says here that it contains nickel but no iron, which is deeply strange because iron and nickel occur together in nature, which for many people, we don't know that, are adjacent on the periodic table, and separating them requires a very difficult process. So you're thinking, did that happen naturally?
It's hard to imagine it happening naturally. So now you're stuck in the place where he goes, where maybe it's not a natural object, and that's
And then if it's not a natural object, it has some form of external influence. You're like, well, let's not jump to conclusions, but what is that?
yeah.
The other thing that's peculiar for anyone who hasn't been following is that it both has a tail and an anti-tail simultaneously. What does that mean?
So comets typically have tails. So this is material being blown off by the solar winds. And there's actually two tails. There's an ion tail having to do with the charged particles going one way, and then the uncharged particles going a different way. But that's what we call generally the tail. Now, an anti-tail goes out ahead of the object, which comets don't have anti-tails. So why is there an anti-tail? That's not obvious why you would have that.
Do we see any other objects that have anti-tails? Like, where does our understanding of an anti-tail come from?
I don't think there are other objects with anti-tails. I'd not heard of them before, so...
I think there's a lot of people who are like, those three things are peculiar, and yet the people who are the best and most capable of trying to understand those peculiarities seem uninterested in exploring them.
It very well could be that it's something that we're seeing for the first time. That doesn't mean that, by definition, the word alien means other, right? It's something that's foreign.
I don't jump to the conclusion that it's an alien craft either, but it's an interesting object that's clearly different than things we have in our solar system, so we should be studying it.
I wonder if you can speak just a little bit about how you approach things like conversations around remote viewing, conversations around telepathy, right? Where we're both fans and, I'm very, very skeptical of some of the claims that many people are taking from the telepathy tapes. What's your sort of perspective in how, in general, we need to be having conversations about things like remote viewing or telepathy?
These are things that just haven't been studied carefully. They've been studied to some degree, and the data is sometimes interesting, right? But it isn't believed by the general scientific community. It's dismissed by the general scientific community because it doesn't fit into their worldview, which is, I think, a problem because there's lots of things we don't understand, and we should be studying these things. It doesn't matter that it doesn't mean that every scientist needs to study them. It means that somebody should be studying them, and that person should be left alone and not made fun of and allowed to study them. I think that's what I mean by that. Take something that's not so different, and especially in considering telepathy with the nonverbal autistic kids, savantism. Savantism is strange. It's well documented, well understood, and it's strange. And I've heard people say scientists say the craziest things about them. Perhaps I've heard this said many times by people who aren't in biology. There could be a gene for playing piano. I'm like, how the hell is there a gene? When did that evolve on the African savannah, as people love to say, right? Who evolved a gene for playing piano? Nobody. That did not happen. So now you have to explain this. Or you have some other strange cases. There was a 20-year-old kid from Australia, I believe. He had taken a course in elementary, a first-year course in Chinese at one point. Gets into a car accident in a coma, comes out of the coma, unable to speak English, can only speak Chinese, and he's better than year one Chinese. So now, where does this come from? How do you explain this? This is tough. These are tough things, and I think they need to be studied. That's what I think about them. Study it, try it. The remote viewing, I actually tried that myself. And then that's interesting because there are times when it works. How do I know it works? Because seeing is believing. If you do it and you see it in your mind, and then you see the picture you were supposed to view, and it's the same thing, then I know it works sometimes. It doesn't work all the time, and it was actually really interesting because I had this app on my phone. I was doing the remote viewing app, and when I just was playing around with it just to start, I thought, well, let's just see if this works. I'm just going to try it. Right? Why not? And I could get it right 2/3 of the time, where it should have been a 50-50 chance.
Yeah, that's
So
66 and 2/3%. That is more than 50.
It's more than 50, but it's not really that significant, right? So, but I was doing it pretty consistently, and I thought, again, thought of my colleague Matthew. I thought, okay, I got to get the statistics up so then I can prove to Matthew, then I can show Matthew and he'll believe me, right? Because there were times when I knew that I was seeing what I was supposed to be seeing. And so I knew that it worked just because I had experienced it, but I couldn't prove it to him. So I wanted to get the statistics up. So once I had that motivation to get the statistics up, my ability dropped. I mean, plummeted. I went from getting 2 out of 3 right to getting 3 out of 14 right. More statistically significant in the wrong direction. And I thought, this is better evidence that it's a real phenomenon, because when I'm trying to do it, I'm failing. And then I thought, and that makes it really hard to study, because if you've got somebody who's trying to do it, you're going to get more failures. So now, how do you study something like that? I don't have a good answer for that.
Can you explain to people who might not understand why that's proof that there is a phenomenon when something goes in a statistically significant direction in the opposite direction than you want when you put effort in? What might be going on? I mean, I have my own theories, but go ahead.
Neuroscience-wise, I don't know what's going on. Well, I really don't know what's going on physics-wise. I don't know how that's possible. And in fact, I doubt that I'm remote viewing a JPEG encoded file on a computer. I don't think that's what's happening at all. I think it's actually more like seeing my phone in the future. The way the app works is you get a blank screen, you get a file number, which corresponds to a photograph that you're supposed to be remote viewing. And then once you've drawn a picture or taken notes or whatever you're doing to help remind yourself what you're seeing, it then presents 2 photographs. One is the target and one's the non-target. So you have a 50-50 chance of guessing which one. And the app actually has a slider, so you can say, I'm pretty sure it was this, or you can change how sure you are. So at the core, at the root, though, there's a 50-50 chance of getting it right. So getting it 2 out of 3 times is clearly better than 50-50, but getting it right only 3 out of 14 times is far below what you would expect from just guessing. So
you just presented the possibility that you are somehow accessing an image from the future. That's astounding, right? Like, that's a very powerful notion. And the reason that, one could explain for when you try harder that you do worse is that whatever seems to be involved, from all of the variety of people we've spoken to, whatever seems to be involved in this aspect of extrasensory perception or of seeing in a way, right, that is beyond the way that we see with our eyeballs, right? The notion being that there's some sort of passive state, some dropping in state, some meditative state, right? A lot of people use these states to access this information that when we are not actively, cognitively working on it, there's a place that we drop into that makes us more receptive to information that exists on that kind of energetic plane.
Yeah, that's not a bad theory. And I think I'm seeing it in the future, because there have been times when I've actually drawn both images in the proper order, the target and the non-target. I've done that several times. And in fact, I did an experiment with my daughter. We both did it at the same time. I drew the target and she drew the non-target.
I have to try this. I need to try this.
We should absolutely try it, but also can we explore this notion of seeing into the future? In this scenario, the future exists and you're just hopping forward in your mind's eye?
I have no idea how that would work. I mean, as a physicist, this is a tough thing to actually say, right? But this is what, yeah, that's the only way I can explain what I was drawing and seeing in my mind when I was doing it, right? I saw what was presented on the phone in the proper order. So I think I have an easier time believing that I'm somehow seeing my phone in the future, seeing the image in the future, than I have an easier time believing that than I do believing that I have some knowledge of the variable states in a computer program that's going to present those images to me.
Sure.
But
it's like, which is less unbelievable?
Which is less unbelievable? And seeing in the future to me feels a little less unbelievable, but maybe it's not. I don't know. That's it.
I think there's also an interesting complication here that it's being presented by a computer versus, the examples of remote viewing that we've heard where there have been military psychics and intuitives using that to solve crime or to gather intel. That was sort of before the computer era, and what they were doing is trying to tap into the field or consciousness of an individual or an organization and get data. To think that the computer is going to send something and what is the variable chance of that digital code seems like a harder thing if we're imagining that consciousness exists on multiple planes. Like the computer consciousness seems harder to crack.
Yeah, I would have a hard time imagining how that's going to work. How am I viewing, how am I able to get information about the variable states inside a computer? I mean, these are the amount of charge on certain transistors inside a computer that has billions of transistors. That would be strange, yeah.
No, the most logical explanation, as we're speaking to a physics professor, is that time is not linear and there are ways to access time in the future and bring that information back to the present. That's the most logical explanation.
Which is hard because I don't know how that would work, but it still feels easier. Yeah.
Yeah. Why do you believe? What has happened in your life that makes you believe that there's something beyond, right, the concrete reality of our existence that we are programmed to invest in?
As Jeff Kripal would call it, I had a flip. I was flipped at one point where we had an experience where it just broke everything.
Oh.
I was going to bed very late. My son Henry was almost 2 years old. He could walk and talk a little bit, right? We took the side off his crib and lowered it so he could get in and out of bed. But this meant we had to put up a gate by his door so he couldn't get out in the middle of the night and hurt himself. And so we had a gate by the door. And he would sometimes stand by the gate, but he's, 2 years old. So he's like this, right? Looking through the gate itself. And so I was going to bed very late one night, and I'll give you all the caveats. I'm going from a brightly lit room to a dim hallway, and it's 2 a.m. I'm half asleep. I'm tired, and I'm very tired. And I'm coming down the hall, and I see what I thought was Henry standing at the gate. And as I get closer, I realize this is not a 2-year-old boy. It's a 5-year-old boy. The kid is a good, chest and shoulders above the gate.
Do you have another child in the home?
Nope, just one. Just at the time, it was just my son Henry, and so it's just him. He's supposed to be in bed. In his room is standing this boy, a 5-year-old boy. I am confused and worried, and I come up to him. I'm like, Henry, is that you? What are you doing, Henry? And the kid wasn't looking at me. He was kind of looking off to the side. And I got across the hallway from him. I mean, how wide's a hallway? It's like 4 feet, right? So I'm literally 4 feet away from this kid. And it's clearly not my son. He's a 5-year-old boy. He has black hair. He's wearing a white shirt with long sleeves.
What?
He's looking off to the left. And I was like, Henry is, and by this time I'm scared because I'm like, I don't know what's happening. So I've got my arms crossed like a defensive, position, and I'm leaned up against the wall. I'm like, Henry, is that you? Are you all right? And the boy looks at me and his eyes are wide. He looks scared. The boy is scared and he looks at me, and I think that made me feel more scared. He looks at me and he's just scared and doesn't say anything. But he did the weirdest maneuver. He did this. He was holding on to the gate, and he very slowly let go of the gate. I think, in retrospect, I think he was trying not to make a sudden movement. And then he just backs into the shadows with his hands like that, right? And he backs into the shadows, and I'm just like, all right. Then the parent kicks in. The father kicks in. There's a stranger in my kid's bedroom. the whole game changes, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, who is this kid? And I go running at the door. I literally jump over the gate, ready to grab a 5-year-old. And there's no one there. There's nobody there. I look around the room. I check on Henry. Henry's asleep in bed, tucked in, fine. I look everywhere. I look under the bed. I look in the drawers of the dresser. I'm looking through the closet. There's nobody in this room. And then I'm like, look, Kevin, it is 2 a.m. You need to get your ass to bed. You're half asleep. You're hallucinating. Just go to bed. Everything's fine. So I check on Henry again. He's fine. I leave the room and just go next door to the bathroom. The bathroom's adjacent to it.
I would have already burnt the house down with everyone in it. I would have been like, this incarnation of our existence is over.
I just convinced myself I had hallucinated, right? I'm just dreaming while awake. That's all. So I go next door to the bathroom and I'm brushing my teeth. And I hear all of a sudden Henry starts shouting, "Mommy, Daddy, help, help." And I run out of the bathroom, jump over the gate again for the second time. "Henry, what's wrong?" And he's sitting up in bed. He's very upset. He's crying. And "What's wrong?" He goes, "Daddy, there's someone in my room."
No.
And at first I got worried and I was like, no. There's no one in the room. You checked. You hallucinated. And I said to Henry, "Henry, there's nobody in the room. It was me. I was here just a few minutes ago and I checked on you. That was me." And he goes, "No, Daddy, it wasn't you. It was a boy. There's a boy in my room."
No.
And I was like, "Oh,
Kevin!
no, you can't say that. That is not cool." That is very uncool. And yeah, there's a boy in my room, and then I'm scared. I'm like, now I don't know what's going on.
I'm still scared, and it didn't happen to me.
And I said, "Did he hurt you?" "No, he didn't hurt me." And I said, "Well, why are you upset?" He goes, "I don't know. There's a boy in my room." I said, "Well, what was he doing?" And he goes, "Standing." And I said, "Where was he standing?" "By the door." No. And I was like, well, shit, that's where I saw him standing too. I saw a boy standing there too just 3 minutes ago. And I was like, "All right, do you want me to sleep in here with you tonight?" He goes, "Yes, please." So I went down the hall to get we had an inflated air mattress in case he needed someone to sleep in there with him. So I brought the air mattress back, laid it next to his bed. I lay down on it and he's lying down and I'm kind of rubbing his back and he's getting all drowsy eyed. And all of a sudden his brow furrows a bit and he goes, "There he is, Daddy. He's right behind you." And I roll over and there's no one there. And I rolled back and I said, "Henry, I don't see anybody." And he goes, "Daddy, I don't know. It's like before. He was there and then he wasn't there." And it's like that. That's it. We're out of here. I'm done.
Do you still live in that house?
No, not anymore.
God bless it.
So I took him next door to our bedroom, put him in our bed, and my wife roused a bit. She goes, "Why are you in here with Henry?" And I said, "He's sleeping in here with us tonight and I don't want to talk about it till the morning." That was it. And he was up before I was, and so she asked him what happened, and he told her, and then I woke. Then she asked me about it, and I told her what happened. Yeah,
and then she divorced you and burned the house down.
No, she did it. But
what did she say?
We eventually moved. I mean, she was kind of freaked out by it. She had 2 people telling her the same story, and and that's what broke me. It was the fact that he saw the same thing, and now what do you do? And I told some of my colleagues in the physics department about it because I was upset. The last thing I want is attention about this. That's certainly not that. I was worried because now in my mind, a person can just appear in my son's bedroom at any time. How do you deal with that? How do I know that he's safe at any given moment? That was what I worried about. I did not sleep for like 2 years. I literally would just stay up all night and check on him. And then I would go to sleep. I would teach afternoon classes and I would just sleep in the morning and go to my classes.
Did you ever see the child again?
No,
And your son never saw him?
no.
Did your son grow up to look like that? I mean, I can't even ask it without it making me cry. Was it your son in the future?
He didn't look exactly like that kid. No, I don't know who that kid was, and I sometimes worry about that. I'm like, if is that a person? Is that, and what is their life like? What happened? What happened to them? Because he was clearly scared.
Was the clothing of the child that you saw modern clothing? Did it feel of this time period?
It didn't look modern. It looked different, but I don't think it was necessarily old either. It was just different.
Are you comfortable with saying, I'm a physicist and I saw a ghost?
I don't say that because I don't know what the hell a ghost is. So I can't
Right.
really say it was a ghost. I can tell you what happened, and I'm comfortable telling people what happened because it happened, and I had to deal with it.
That's really important nuance. You know, what you know is that something happened. You don't know how to
I don't know
explain
what
it.
that was.
Right.
Yeah.
But and we could have, if your son had not reported what he reported, we could have very easily said you had, let's say, a first episode of a hallucinatory, sleepwalking
I had
experience.
totally convinced myself of that. By the time I went to the bathroom, I was like, I am clearly hallucinating. Just go to bed.
Right. And even if it's never happened to you, that could have been a late adult onset, of a pattern that we very rarely see. Right. So these are all the impossible things. But the fact is, you now have had a human experience that no one is allowed to tell you did not happen because you heard your son report that, you experienced it. Could it be that some of the details have morphed? Yes, but we're opening a door, right, to this kind of possibility.
I took notes in my journal about it right away because I didn't want it to morph. But it was, yeah, it was upsetting. I mean, it's an upsetting thing to have to worry about this, and I'll make the joke: who are you going to call? I mean, seriously, there's nobody that you can talk to about it, and there's nobody you can help. So it's a very helpless feeling, a very worrisome thing.
Oh,
It gave me a lot of sympathy for people who have had experiences like that or claim to have had experiences like this, both with respect to what you might call ghosts or even the alien abduction business. I have a lot of sympathy for those people because there's no one who can help you. And that's worrisome.
How did it change your outlook about exploring phenomenon outside of the physical realm?
Well, because it broke my worldview. I talked to some of my physicist friends and I said, my colleagues at the department, I said, all right, this happened like last night. What do I do? What do you think? What do you think happened? What do you think this is? And none of them had any answers to it. And I think it highlighted to me that I don't know much about the physical world as I thought I did. It's a hard thing to admit. I mean, I've been a physicist now for 30 years, and I would have hoped I had up until that point I had thought I had a pretty good handle on how things worked until that happened, and then it was like, oh right, it's clearly I don't know anything. So when I first moved into the house, I had we rented the top floor of the house and we had access to the attic. And so we were putting boxes in the attic when the first day we moved in. And I remember the first time I walked into the attic, I had this cold shiver, and I thought, "There's a 5-year-old boy who lives here." That thought came into my head, and I was like, "Oh, Kevin, don't do that to yourself. You're going to scare yourself. That's stupid." I chastised myself, and I hated going up in the attic because I always felt like I was being watched, and I didn't like the attic. And so if my wife wanted me to get something out of a box from the attic, I wouldn't put the box back in the attic. I just left it on the stairs. And if after about 9 months the stairs had boxes on it. And she one day discovered that. She saw the boxes, and I didn't want to admit that I was afraid of the attic. So she goes, "Why are all these boxes there?" And I lied. I told her that I saw a bat in the attic. And so oh yeah, okay, don't go in the attic. I'm like, yes, I won't go in the attic. It's perfect.
wow.
Yeah, so I had a weird feeling about the attic, but that's the only relation. The 5-year-old boy in the attic, was he related to the 5-year-old boy I saw there? Was that why I hallucinated him? But I didn't hallucinate him. So it's hard to get your head around. And I had somebody suggest, well, maybe it's a shared hallucination. I was like, but that's not a thing either. That's a whole other phenomena that we also don't believe. So yeah, it's a tough one.
I don't know.
So I asked my landlord, because I knew my landlord had lived up there for some time. And I finally, it was 10 years later, I emailed him and asked him, did you ever we had some strange experiences in that house. Did you have anything strange happen? And he said that he was painting once between tenants, and the place is all cleared out, so he's just painting, and it was time to leave and lock the place up, but he couldn't find his keys, and he looked all over the house. The keys are not in the house, and he would have left them on the kitchen counter, and they weren't there. And so he was looking and looking and couldn't find them, and then finally he said he had a weird thought that he should check the attic. And he hadn't been up in the attic, but he decided he would check the attic. So he went upstairs to the attic, opened the attic door, and the keys were there on a box right in front of the door. And he said that happened twice. That's what he told me about that.
What do you make of it now? Like, you've had a while to reflect on this. I don't know how long ago this was. This is at least how many years?
Well, he was 2. He's 18 now, so it's 16 years ago.
So it's 16 years. You've explored a lot of the unknown. I think the cultural conversation about extrasensory has changed. What do you take from that experience now? What do you think actually happened?
I don't know what happened. And when I do think about it, I think I worry more about the boy than I do anything, because if he was a real person in some sense, in any sense, or a real consciousness, then I worry about him. I mean, he was clearly scared.
Maybe he was scared by a grown-ass man in his room.
Exactly. I mean, he could have appeared. I mean, what if he's even maybe dreaming, lucid dreaming, and he appears in a strange room, and then this man approaches him, calls him Henry, and then, and then jumps into the room at him. I mean, for the kid, it could have been terrifying. And I think I worry more about that now than I do somebody disappearing in the house. But my son also is now 18, and he's not a 2-year-old baby anymore. So that's different too.
He can see his own ghosts and manage them.
No, but I think it's interesting how much of the emotional content remains of that kind of experience. Because the fact is, these experiences, they don't just exist on a physical plane. They exist on some energetic, emotional plane as well. Some imprint was made on you from this experience.
And I think that's why I'm more sympathetic to people who've had experiences like that. I listen to them, and I'm, do I always believe them? No, not always. It's sometimes really hard to believe, but who am I to say? I mean, I've had that weird thing happen to me. So yeah, sure, maybe something weird happened to them. I think that a little more acceptance, we could all do with a little more acceptance, I think. We might learn something.
Well said. Dr. Kevin Knuth, thank you so much for being here, for sharing so openly. This was really, really fun, and we just really appreciate you so much and your time today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
What was happening for him in that house parallels what could be happening here on Earth. Humans have moved in to a house that has already been occupied, and the real residents are hiding in the shadows, popping out occasionally, being annoyed by the new occupants who are kind of wrecking the place, making a lot of noise, and every now and again, they need a shakeup. And that's basically what happened with him and his house. That kid already lived there.
I mean,
they had no business moving in. They needed to have a ceremony to send him back and help him transition. He was a little stuck.
You know why this planet that we live on is mostly water? Because that's where the aliens live. And here we saunter out of the ocean by our own independent process of evolution, and we decide to destroy the whole planet because we want faster AI computing.
Also, maybe we got kicked out of the ocean. We didn't saunter out. There wasn't room for all of us in the ocean.
We got kicked out of the ocean, Hence tadpoles. We are the tadpole of the living beings of this planet.
Maybe the next phase of evolution for humanity is to go back into the oceans.
Whatever's in there can travel at speeds that we cannot calculate. Their hovercraft seem to emanate radiation, and they can both stop and start cars, but only if they're not diesel.
Doesn't the radiation from their crafts that live underwater affect the animals? Like, how do they not sunburn a whale?
How do they not sunburn a whale? I mean, you could ask many versions of that. But I was thinking about, I'm going to loop all the way back. I'm going to loop back to cattle mutilation that he and his classmates had witnessed. And a professor was like, oh, yeah, it was probably the aliens. A professor of physics. And he said the guy left the room and they laughed. They just laughed their butts off, is I believe what he said, because the thought that a physics professor would say, oh, yeah, cattle mutilations happen. Yeah, it happens all the time. It's likely aliens. And they laughed this guy out of the room. So what happens with cattle mutilations, and I have done some independent investigating, the way that these cattle are mutilated, it is precise surgical level serration. There are organs removed with no other damage to surrounding organs. It's often the removal of the tongue and like the gonads. Do you remember what happened when we were in the backyard and there was a collection of animal organs? You know what? I'm gonna categorize that as falling under the impossible, because what I said is there is no blood. There is no evidence of any animal being killed here. Even if the animal were killed elsewhere, what kind of predator could carve out organs perfectly and transport them by beak, right? I'm thinking they're flying like some sophisticated falcon, and then they're going to place organs in close proximity to where other animals hang out, like the dogs and the deer that hang out in the neighborhood. What did that? So I'm talking about cattle mutilations because these are things that, like, we want to be like, I don't know, but I'm bringing it all the way back.
This is a first for us on MBB. But I think what we should really be focused on was who cleaned up those organs.
We have a photo of those organs, which I do think we may need to offer on Substack. You cleaned up the organs. That was an impossibly unbelievable episode. So check us out over on Substack for not only the organs, but so much more. And from our breakdown to the one we hope you never have. We'll see you next time.
It's Mayim Bialik's breakdown. She's gonna break it down for you. She's got a neuroscience PhD or two. One fiction, and now she's gonna break